You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 261. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Do you ever feel like the biggest thing holding you back is you? If you answer yes to this question, you are in excellent company. You are certainly not alone. I don't think I've ever met anybody who didn't at some point feel this way, or where I didn't see in somebody that there was a big gap between what I knew they were capable of and what they thought they were capable of. You might find that there are areas where you can see there's a gap. There's a decision that you're not making. There's an opportunity you're not pursuing. And you know that you're capable, but there's something standing in your way. And when you do the work, you keep coming back to the same answer. It's something internal. And you might also notice this in others, right? You see in others this potential, this capacity for them to do something, and they are holding themselves back, but they are unable to see it for themselves. And the truth is, we all have that. We all have blind spots. We all have strengths and opportunities and things that we don't even see that we are capable of. And sometimes it takes somebody else letting us know or telling us, hey, you should go do this thing. You'd be really great at it, to even let us see that it's a possibility for us and that it's perfect for you. So the reason we're talking about this as the starting point for today's podcast episode is that today's podcast episode is about leadership. It's about you. It's about you as you are in your practice, in your professional work, in your personal life. It's you showing up as the leader of yourself and as you leading others. This episode is the third in a series of podcast episodes that I've produced that are setting out the three main areas that I coach in and frameworks that I have been using with my clients. And the goal here is to help you situate yourself in your practice, to look at these three areas, evaluate where you stand in each of them so that you have a framework for yourself, some data points to follow, some ideas to make changes if that's what you want to do. And if you want my support with that, of course, you can come in and reach out to me. We can talk about what that looks like. So last week, we talked about career strategy. Before that, we talked about time management. And if you listen to those episodes, then you'll know that time management really is how you spend your day to day. How do you spend every 6 minutes if you're recording your time that way? Career strategy is, are you spending your time on the right things? And leadership is about becoming the person who follows through, the person who executes that career strategy even when it feels difficult. It is the person who is able to stick to the calendar that you create for yourself, even when it's difficult. And that might mean having difficult conversations about boundaries that you're setting. It might mean having difficult conversations about things that you no longer want to do. So today's episode is setting up the framework that I use when working with lawyers in terms of leadership. I'm going to share with you the three main elements of what that looks like. And what I'd encourage you to think about is how this applies to you in your practice, right? If you aren't currently seeing yourself as a leader, or you know there's room for you to expand your leadership role, to embody more of that in your practice, this episode will provide you with a framework with key areas where you can start to focus in order to really enhance and feel in terms of your own identity as an authority, a leader in your practice. So I'm really excited to share this with you. And we're going to start out just by talking about the three main problems, the three main challenges that I see when I work with lawyers when there is a gap in leadership. They're not where they want to be. And the first of those is this idea that you do not see yourself as a leader. And I often hear people refer to the term imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome has been defined in a number of different ways. At its core, it means you feel like you don't really belong. You feel like you're a fake. You feel like at some point people will find out that you're not who you are, that you are an imposter. You don't deserve to be there. And what this says to me is that there is a disconnect between how you see yourself and how you actually are, who you actually are in your professional work. And there are two ways that this can play itself out. Number one is if we look specifically at leadership, sometimes there's a gap in the way you perceive yourself. You don't see yourself as a leader because the leaders that you have been looking to, the leaders in your organization, the leaders that are presented to you are not like you. Maybe they don't look like you. Maybe they have a physical appearance. Maybe they have a gender that is different. Maybe they have a personality that is different. Maybe they are just something that does not resonate with you. Their style doesn't resonate with you. And so you dissociate yourself or you separate yourself from the notion of leader because the examples of leadership that you've seen aren't anything like you. And so consciously or unconsciously, you're telling yourself you're not a leader because you're not like them. Common examples, if you're a woman in practice and all the leaders around you, or most of them, are men leaders, it might be really hard to see yourself in a room as a leader because you're the only woman in the room. So that might create a barrier for you in terms of what you perceive as leadership and how you identify yourself as leader. We often think of leaders as being the person that is the most confident, the loudest voice in the room, the most persuasive voice in the room. And so we might associate leadership with being loud, being extroverted, with being at the front of the room always. And maybe your style is a little bit more subtle. Maybe you're a little bit more reserved. Maybe you don't like speaking in front of groups, but you're able to lead in a different way by developing influence at a micro level and expanding that to a macro level. So you might not see yourself as a leader because you're not loud like the leaders that you have seen. You might find leadership has a tone to it. The leaders that you've witnessed, that you've experienced are more assertive or more aggressive, or it's more top down, and your leadership style is more collaborative. And so you might tell yourself that you cannot be a leader because you're not exhibiting these characteristics. So first and foremost, when it comes to that challenge, you don't see yourself as a leader. It's because you don't see examples of leadership that are aligned with who you are. And so you separate yourself from that idea of leader thinking that cannot be me. Another way that I see imposter syndrome play out, or this lack of connection with identity as leader, is that you think you're not ready. You think that there must be some inflection of time and experience in order for you to become a leader. When X, Y, and Z happen, then you become a leader. And what this can have the effect of doing is pushing leadership off to some point in the future. And that point is always in the future. You never reach it. And so with this distance, with this gap, you never truly embody yourself as a leader. And so you miss out on opportunities to be that leader and be that leader today. So that's the first area where I see real challenges, is you do not identify yourself as a leader. The second area of challenge, and this comes up so frequently in coaching conversations that I have with lawyers, is this idea that you don't feel confident. You don't feel confident doing the thing, whether it's changing jobs, whether it's speaking up in the room, whether it's having that difficult conversation. And you feel like you need to be confident, you need to exhibit confidence before you take the action, right? It's this chicken egg thing. You feel like you need to be confident before you do the thing, but until you do the thing, you never really feel confident. And so you get stuck. This lack of confidence, or this perception that you need more confidence, keeps you where you're at. And what happens is you can end up playing small. You shy away from leadership because you see the actions, the things you would be doing in a leadership role as being something that requires more confidence than you currently have. And because you don't have that confidence, you step away from it, you shy away from it, and it never has the chance to develop greater. So that's where I see so much potential, because there's ways of developing the confidence and also learning to move forward when you don't yet have that confidence. The third area where I see lawyers struggle with leadership is that they don't communicate. They don't present themselves as leaders. And this can sometimes happen if you're really tied up in what you might think of as a good student mentality, the person who does the things that people want them to do. You're a great box checker. You're really, really excellent at meeting the standards that others set for yourself. But when it comes to you being the authority, you being the leader, you taking ownership and accountability for the actions, the words, the way that you present, then you continue to undermine yourself. You continue to diminish your leadership, yourself as leader. And that has this sort of self-reinforcing effect. You do not see yourself as a leader, consciously or unconsciously, and others, consciously or unconsciously, pick up on that same thing. They aren't seeing you as a leader because you are not presenting as a leader. So this can also come up when you're really humble. And so many of us, we've been taught, be humble. And it's a wonderful characteristic to have in many ways. And I don't want to say that you cannot be humble, that you cannot be modest or not bragging, or the opposite of humble, that you need to be arrogant. However, we do need to find a way of communicating in a way that doesn't diminish. We're not humble to the point of self-effacing, because it doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve the people that we serve. And so we need to find a way to act, to communicate in a way that exudes leadership, but that doesn't necessarily cross the line for you in terms of your moral compass, right? What you think is appropriate. So here, this pillar, right, this idea of communication is to look at the opportunities you have where you are presenting to the outside world. If we look at, for example, imposter syndrome, and we look at confidence, those are internal aspects of leadership. A lot of that comes down to self-identity and understanding the way that your emotions work and how to regulate. We'll get to that in a minute. And communication is where that is externalized. And so we want the external representation, the communication, whether that's verbal communication, nonverbal communication, we want that to be in alignment with who you are and how you see yourself as a leader. And we want that to instill confidence in others. We want that to exhibit leadership in a way that is aligned for you, that feels authentic and is powerful. So what that means is if you're currently shying away from delegating and setting boundaries, that may be a sign that you're not yet comfortable with how you can do that in a way that aligns with you, right? If all your models of leaders have delegated in a way that doesn't sit well with you, then maybe you're shying away for that reason. So how do we find a method of communicating, of delegating that does work for you? How does setting boundaries look from your perspective when you're fully embracing your own version of leadership? How do you speak up, right? If you're in a room with a number of other lawyers and you've got an idea and you're debating whether or not to raise your hand and voice your opinion, is there something that's holding you back? And if so, what would it look like for you to take on that leadership role, to voice your opinion, to make your way known? What would be different for you, and how do you want to communicate? And then finally, if you're looking at others, this is something that I see often here, when you struggle to define yourself as leader and you're looking to others to tell you what to do, right? What should I say? And I mean, AI is really great for that. How do I frame a difficult conversation? What are scripts that I can use when I go to set a boundary? How can I delegate more effectively? All of this is part and parcel of the way that you're communicating. And so I 100% endorse the idea of seeking out guidance, looking at different strategies, seeing what works for other people. And at the end of the day, I want to see you using your filter, your discretion, your values to decide how it is that you're going to have those conversations, how you're going to communicate, the executive presence you want to have in your professional environments. That we want to be intentional, and we want you to be able to follow through. So those are the three main problems. And if we take a big step back, then what does that mean? Why is it a problem? Because it means you're probably holding yourself back, right? Going back to that original question, do you ever find that the biggest thing that's holding you back is you? We want to move past that. What else is happening here? Well, indirectly, you may be missing out on opportunities to show other people what leadership can look like. When we have more diverse ways of leading, when we show that there are more diverse ways of leading, that gives permission to others, explicitly, implicitly, for them to do the same. They get to then design their own models of leadership. And we know that we benefit from having multiple styles of leadership. We don't want everybody to be leading in the same way. We need that. We need people to lean on their strengths, show us different ways of doing things. And so if you're holding yourself back, you are missing out potentially on opportunities to model your style of leadership, to lead by example, and to give people around you permission for them to do the same. And of course, if you are not taking on leadership, if you're not expanding to that full potential that we know you have, we are all missing out. We are all missing out on the amazing work that we know you're capable of doing. And so we need you. We need you to do that work. We really do. At a more microscopic level, you might notice this in your day-to-day, right? If we go back to the framework that I've been sharing over the past 3 weeks, if we look at time management, people talk about productivity and getting things done. And so you may be productive, you're getting things done, but maybe you're not doing the right things. You aren't making the difficult decisions to let go of some of the things that you're currently doing that maybe feel easy or they feel like things that you should do, but you know that spending time in those areas is preventing you from working on the bigger picture projects. So that leadership piece, that identity piece may be what is required to help you shift so that yes, you're being productive, but you're being productive in the right areas. It may mean that you're getting that clarity over what you want. We talked about that last week. So getting career clarity. But if you're lacking in the leadership component, right, that confidence, the idea that you see yourself as being able to succeed, to lead yourself, to lead others, to communicate the way that you need to. If you see yourself as lacking in this third area, then you might find that you don't have the confidence to follow through on that career strategy, those big picture ideas, those goals that you've set for yourself. And so we really want to make sure that we're closing that gap. And then finally, you might find that at a day-to-day level, when you're not stepping into that identity as leader, you might notice that there's this gap. There's a gap between where you are and the potential that you know that you have. And instead of that gap getting smaller, you see yourself making progress toward that identity, toward being the person, the lawyer that you know you're capable of being. Instead, you notice that that gap is actually getting wider, and that creates an even bigger sense of discomfort, right? Of disconnect between where you are and where you know you could be. So we really want to help to close that gap, to help you stay on track so that you're continuing to get closer to your potential, which sidebar is infinite. And so yes, there will always be that striving. Yes, you will always be pursuing and growing, but we want to feel like we're moving in that direction. We want to work toward that potential. Your potential will then keep on expanding, as opposed to feeling stagnant where you're sort of getting left behind. Another really critical thing about working on your leadership at an identity level is that your identity is critical in implementation, follow through, and sustaining habits. So if you ever look at habit formation, and so much of what we do day to day is based on habit, when you lack the identity of the person who is doing that thing, right? If you see yourself as a leader who is effective at using their time effectively, when you identify that way, then the actions that are required to maintain that flow so much more naturally, as compared to thinking of yourself as a person who doesn't have control over their time, as a person who needs others to approve of their schedule. There's a big difference there. And so the identity work is critical, and we want to make sure that we are helping you, we are supporting you in being able to see yourself as the leader that you are, that you're choosing to be. So the solution to the problems that I just mentioned is to have a clear framework, to have a clear process to help develop yourself as a leader. And that means not just as a leader of others, but also as a leader of yourself. I think we sometimes jump to the idea that leadership must involve a formal title, a leadership role, and in some cases it will. And also not overlook the leadership that is leadership of yourself. First and foremost, you lead you, and from there, you lead others. Now, the reason I think a framework is so effective here is that, as with a lot of the work that I do with lawyers, there's an element of fear when you start making changes. When you start making changes in the way that you manage your time, when you start making changes about how you want your career to unfold, when you start making changes about who you want to be, it can be scary. And so what I have found to be really helpful is to have a process in place so that you know what to expect, you know what you're focused on, and it can reduce the feeling of overwhelm, right? There's so much to do here. I don't know where to start. This gives you some clear pillars, some clear steps to follow so that you feel like you're on track. You feel safe in a process. You see the tangible steps and how each of them applies. And that gives you the additional support that you need as you're making some of these changes. And the identity changes are challenging because in some cases, what you're doing is letting go of strategies that have worked really, really well for you in order to take on new strategies that are going to work better. And leadership, to me, that transition, it's almost like when you're riding a bicycle. And you'll know if you've ever ridden a bicycle that you've got different gears. You've got the gear that is very easy to pedal, right? It's easy to start out, but you can only go so fast. And so as you gain speed, you want to move to a tougher gear. You're not pedaling faster. You actually need to shift gears in order to make your pedaling more effective. And that's what leadership is. It's letting go of that lower gear and stepping into that next gear. And that can feel really scary, right? Especially if you think, what's going to happen when I hit another hill and I want to go back to that gear, that lower gear. So this is why it's so important and why it's helpful to have this framework in place, not only so that you've got a path to follow, but also so that you feel safe as you are letting go of the things that maybe have worked so far, but aren't going to get you to that next level. So going back to the 3 parts of the framework then, and how this would look. And as we go through these, please do consider how this is showing up in your practice. If you're thinking about yourself as leader, first and foremost, the way that you're leading yourself. And secondly, how you're leading others, whether it's the clients that you're serving, whether it's members of your team. How does this apply to you? So the first step in terms of the framework for leadership is to look at your self-concept. How do you see yourself? And what we want to do here is to redefine you as leader. And this really does begin with the notion of a self-concept. And if you've never heard that term before, it's really the way that you see yourself. It's part of a skill, an executive functioning skill, metacognition, which is the ability to step back and see yourself. So if you were to imagine that you're a fly on the wall, or you're floating above the room watching you every day, it's observing yourself. And it's really hard to do. This is why it's so helpful to have someone else reflect this back to you, whether it's a coach, a friend, a colleague, a mentor, because other people will see you differently than how you see yourself. Even when you look in the mirror, the reflection isn't a true representation of how others see you. You're flipped left to right. So we want to understand how you are currently seeing yourself. As I mentioned, habit formation is key. Your ability to maintain habits is very much linked to how you see yourself. So if you start to notice, okay, I see myself as a person who does X, then you live into that. A very sort of easy example is a couple of years ago, I noticed I was coming home and I would take my jacket and throw it on a chair, or I'd throw it on the sofa. And I didn't like that. I decided, I just don't want to be the person who leaves her jacket on a chair anymore. And so I changed my identity that day. I said, I am a woman who hangs up her coat when she enters the house, period. And since I made that declaration, I could probably count on one hand the number of times I have not hung my coat up upon entering the house. I do it because I've told myself that is my identity and that's how I choose to be. So for you, what are identities that you want to adopt, that you want to tell yourself and follow through with? That is what identity works. Now, another reason identity is so important is that definition, that concept you have of yourself is, whether conscious or unconscious, is potentially limited. There's a notion of upper limits. Gay Hendricks talks about it in his book, The Big Leap, where we all have this internal set point. We reach a certain level of success and it's almost like we hit a bumper, we hit a wall. And if we're not careful, we can stay stuck there because it feels comfortable. And we're always driving toward homeostasis. We're always driving to stay at a certain level. So if we're unconsciously letting that set point stay where it is, then when we bump up against it, when you reach that new level of leadership, for example, if it feels uncomfortable to you, you might pull yourself back down because it's uncomfortable. You're pushing past a set point. So what this skill can do, this self-concept work can do, is help you identify where you may have a set point, a limit that you've set for yourself, and then we get to work on expanding that limit. So these are ways that you can really address that self-concept, and this is how you solve for imposter syndrome. When you redefine what leadership looks like, you're not looking at leadership as this thing that is external to you, that is got to be somebody else, right? You define it in a way that aligns with your values and what you want to accomplish. When you redefine yourself, if you look at that way that you're defining yourself and aligning yourself as the leader that you're choosing to be, letting go of the aspects that aren't working and bringing in the new, you are now stepping into leadership as you have defined it in alignment with who you are. So instead of feeling like an imposter, you're now feeling like a leader. You're identifying yourself as a leader. So that's step one, your self-concept. Step two, I mentioned that one of the biggest challenges that I see, one of the biggest problems is that people are holding themselves back. You may be holding yourself back because you don't feel confident doing the next thing. I see it all the time and I experience it myself. I am aware of it. I see it. And I know that I need to work on certain things in order to take steps in areas where I may not have the answers yet. And I want the same for you. And this notion of confidence is so inherent, especially in the practice of law, where you're building confidence, right? You want to exude confidence to the lawyers that you work with, the lawyers who are on opposing sides of files. You want to have confidence with your clients. You want to have confidence with yourself. And this feeling of confidence, we place so much value on it. And yet for so many of you, of us, confidence feels like it's out of reach. And until you feel confident, you do not take steps, right? You're waiting to feel confident. And so it can keep you stuck in so many ways. And you might think about it for yourself. What are some areas where you are not doing something because you don't yet feel confident? What are some of the conversations you might be avoiding today because you don't feel confident about the outcome? Where are you saying yes to doing things, taking things on, instead of setting boundaries the way that you know that you want to set the boundary and should if you want to make space for the other things you want to do? Where are there opportunities that you are aware of the opportunity, you want to put your name forward, but you don't feel like you're ready yet? So confidence at the end of the day is a feeling. It is an emotion. And that emotion may be standing between you and taking action. And if you struggle with confidence, my guess is that you're also struggling with other emotions. Emotions like fear, the fear of failing, the fear of rejection, the fear of judgment, the fear of things not going the way that you want, the fear that you're not going to be able to live with yourself if it doesn't work out, fear, self-doubt, that feeling like there's something that is inherently missing, that you don't have the skills, that you're not able to get those skills, that there's a gap, again, going back to that imposter syndrome between who you are and what leaders look like or where you need to be to act. There might be anxiety. It might be that you're really judging yourself really harshly, and that's feeding into the lack of confidence. You're telling yourself that you don't have what it takes or whatever it is. There might be shame even, that there's shame that you're not as far along as you wanted to be, or shame that somebody else has judged you in the past and so you don't want to do it again. So there are all these emotions. There's confidence and there's all these other emotions. And so the key here when it comes to leadership is to find a way to mend your relationship with confidence as well as other emotions that may be holding you back, so that you are able to take the actions that are required as leader in order to perform the way that you want to perform. And so here's where, in terms of leadership coaching, emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, understanding your emotions, that is actually at the core of this part of the work. It's not that you don't know what to do. It's that you need the emotional resilience, the strength, the ability to move past difficult emotions in order to do the things that you know you want to do, that you need to do. And so, number one, that looks at emotional regulation. If you think about your executive functioning skills, I mentioned one a minute ago, metacognition. There are different orders of complexity, or a more elevated spectrum, if you will, of the executive functions. So, for example, planning, organization, those are higher up relative to things like emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is a precursor to task initiation implementation. You need to have the emotional piece of it resolved in order to do the next thing. So what we want to do is unlock your capacity, unlock your higher level executive functioning skills by finding a way to regulate your emotions, so that if you're not feeling confident and you are feeling these other emotions that are uncomfortable, you're still able to move forward. So that is central to leadership, is regulating your emotions, understanding your emotions, being able to be conversant with your emotions. Another aspect of confidence is understanding that confidence is not a one and done exercise, that it is not something that you have or do not have, that confidence is a skill that you can develop. And this very much blends beautifully with the work of Carol Dweck, who talks about having a growth mindset. When you apply yourself to learn something that is challenging for you, you get better at it. When you learn how to develop your skills of confidence, you get better at it. You get to be more confident. And the more confident you are, the easier it is for you to take action on those things that you anticipate are challenging. It's the difference between acting and not acting. And then finally, we want to find a way here to help you move forward, even if you don't have that sense of confidence yet, right? You've got those difficult emotions. What are ways we can approach those situations so that you're still able to move forward? You're still able to act, because the more actions you take, the more you're going to learn. You're either going to succeed or you're going to learn something that will help you succeed the next time. And if you keep doing this long enough, your confidence will start to expand, because the trail of successes you'll have behind you, that list is going to grow. You are going to feel more confident as a result. So that's the second branch, if you will, of leadership coaching, the second part of my framework, which is building up the confidence in order to take action, which leads you to the third step, the third part of the framework, which is communication. That is resolving, in a sense, the problem that I identified at the beginning, which is that the block is that you have what it takes, but you're not communicating in a way that demonstrates to others or to yourself that you have what it takes. So what does that mean? It means we need to take everything you've just done, that work you've done on defining yourself as leader, building up your confidence and your emotional resilience, and communicating in a way that effectively tells others that you are a leader, that tells yourself that you are a leader. We're wanting to align those things. This means being really intentional about the words that you choose, the words that you choose to use when you speak with others, and the words you choose when you speak with yourself. if you haven't recently audited your internal dialogue, today might be a really good day just to notice what you tell yourself. Because if you're telling yourself things like, you're not ready, you're never going to do this right, everyone's going to be so upset with you, you don't have time for this, you need to do X, Y, Z instead, even though you know it's not really what you want. Notice what that voice is telling you, because my guess is that there's room there to improve that internal dialogue, to be the boss of yourself using language that is empowering instead of language that is undermining your confidence, that is pulling you away from leadership identity. It's also in the way that you communicate with others. Are you using words that undermine your authority consciously or unconsciously? And if so, what do we need to do to shift that? Again, going back to the idea that you may be socially conditioned to be humble at all costs. Okay, can we keep a part of that, right? What is it about being humble that is of value to you? Maybe it's not wanting to put yourself in a position that you're better than other people. Okay, well, maybe I'm not better than you, but maybe I have authority here. And so I need to be the one to direct this conversation. I need to be the one to direct this project. You're good. I'm good, and we're going to collaborate on this. I'm going to be the one who ultimately takes responsibility, who takes authority. So I'm going to communicate in a way that aligns with that, recognizing you as who you are. So we want to be able to speak in a way that communicates with confidence, with clarity, that positions you as leader instead of playing down and not taking on that role. So that means your body language as well. In a Zoom meeting, in an in-person context, are there things that you're doing consciously or unconsciously that are diminishing your authority? And again, maybe today is the day to start to notice, what is your body language? How are you positioning your shoulders? How are you speaking? Is your voice clear? It doesn't have to be the loudest voice in the room, but are you communicating in a way that feels aligned with you? Does it feel confident to you? Are you speaking with a level of authority? Are your statements firm? Are you ending every sentence with a question mark? That upspeak that can sometimes undermine your authority. We want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do with the words that you're choosing, the way that you're communicating, using your nonverbal language so that you not only feel confident. You can go back to the work of Amy Cuddy. She talks about body language and what it does for you physiologically in terms of either enhancing or undermining your sense of authority, your sense of confidence. Are you doing things that are intentionally building you up, or are you consciously or unconsciously doing things that are kind of bringing you down? So we want to be clear about who you are when you communicate. This is where the rubber hits the road. Communicating is really where you're externalizing who you are as leader. Think about it. You're having a conversation with your client about a decision they need to make. Maybe it's a really difficult decision. How are you leading them through that conversation? How are you setting up the structure of that conversation to make it safe for them, to make it feel organized for them, so the decision is made more clear for them? If you're speaking up at a meeting, you want to share an idea. How are you presenting that? What words do you use to introduce your idea? Is it just an idea that I had, or is it, I've got something that could help here? What language are you choosing? It might be that you're asking for an extension or telling somebody you need an extension. You're speaking with a client, you need to move the deadline back. You're speaking with a colleague, somebody internally, you need to start shifting some timelines around. How are you communicating in that way? You might think of that as boundaries that you're setting. How are you doing that in a way that is confident? You're not coming at that conversation with a feeling of defensiveness or apologizing profusely. Maybe there's an apology that's warranted, but if not, you're not apologizing. This is very matter of fact. How are you communicating in a way that aligns with a leader's energy as opposed to something less than that? It could be that you're delivering bad news or having some other type of difficult conversation. Your client isn't getting what they want. They lost a case, they lost an application, whatever the bad news might be. How are you leading in that conversation? How are you leading yourself? How are you leading your client? It also applies to conversations where you're delegating. Maybe you're looking at delegating tasks to your team and you want to have a sense of authority in those conversations so that it's very clear what it is that you're asking for. It's very clear what the expectations are, what the dynamic is going to be. And we also need to potentially think about what feedback is going to look like. So let's say you delegate, the product comes back, it's not at all what you needed. How are you going to deal with that? How are you going to deliver the difficult feedback so that in the future you're getting from the people who are working with you the things that you really need? It's helpful for you, it's helpful for them. And the goal here is to develop intentionally and develop your sense of self-trust. If you think about communication and where so many of us struggle, it's not only communicating in the first place, but then feeling confident after the fact that you did it right? How many times have you had a conversation where the other person didn't respond or react the way that you had hoped that they would, and you leave that conversation and you replay it time and time again over in your head, and you're second guessing yourself, you're ruminating, you're really spending a lot of time kind of stuck in a conversation that has come and gone. You might seek external validation, right? You're telling everybody about this conversation, trying to get someone else to tell you that it's okay what you said. Sometimes this happens ahead of a conversation. You need to have a difficult conversation, so you're asking everybody for their advice on what you should say, instead of relying on your own judgment, on your own wisdom, your own style, your way of communicating. So the goal here is for you to not only be able to communicate in a way that is effective because it's your way of communicating, but also to develop that self-trust that this is right for you. You don't need everybody else's approval. You need, first and foremost, your own approval when it comes to leading and the way that you communicate as a leader. So that really sums up the work that I do with lawyers in terms of leadership and the framework that I think is really useful. To start with that self-concept, defining and redefining leadership for you. What does that look like? The second part of it really is gaining the relationship with confidence and difficult emotions so that you're able to build your confidence intentionally. You're able to move forward and take action despite not feeling 100% confident. You're able to recognize and manage difficult emotions. They don't hold you back. And then finally, that third element, communicating in a way that aligns with who you are, that demonstrates your strengths in a way that brings people toward you who are aligned with you and allows you not only to work with others, but also to have a relationship with yourself, one of self-trust, where you're speaking to yourself in a way that is kind, that is supportive, that is empowering, so that you continue to grow as a leader. So if any of this is resonating with you, then I would love to carry on the conversation. As I mentioned, this is a third installment, if you will, of 3 parts of the frameworks that I use when I'm working with lawyers. And just to recap them, we've talked about time management and how to approach your practice, right? How to get more control over your practice by developing the systems and the practices and the habits that lead to efficiency, and developing strategies to deal with the internal and external challenges that are, of course, going to come your way. So that's one area, is time management. What are you doing day to day? What exactly is happening on the ground? How are you executing and implementing? How are you being productive using the time that you have effectively? The second branch of the framework that I use when I work with lawyers is career strategy. So that means getting really clear about what you want in terms of your career, clarity about who you are and what you desire as your professional goals, and putting yourself in environments where you can cultivate your skill set, your relationships, the way that you want to set yourself up in practice so that you are reaching those goals and translating your goals into actionable milestones and steps that you can take with timelines and deliverables. And then this third element of the framework, of course, is leadership. It's the confidence to do the things that you know you want to do. It's the confidence to take those steps in terms of time management, those things that you do in a day-to-day that align with who you are as a leader and where you want to go in terms of your goals. And so if you choose to reach out to me to have my support, what I would love to do is help you assess where you are in relation to each of these categories and to see where you're strong, to see where you've already established processes and systems and ways of thinking, mindset, all of that, to see where you're already strong and to see where there's opportunities for more. And this applies whether you're reaching out because you're stuck somewhere, you're feeling pain because you're not where you want to be and you know you want to move out of that place. And it can also be things are actually pretty good and you want to make sure they continue to get better. And what you really want is a thought partner, someone who can sit with you and help you look at the different pieces, help you plan out how you're going to implement whatever strategies we develop together in a way that leads you toward more of what you want to create. You've got big goals, you've got big dreams. You don't want to do it on your own. You want someone there to help you through it. Then that's another time where you might want to reach out and say, hey, listen, I'd really love your help with this. I think this could be really amazing to work together. So that's what I have for you. And if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, do let me know, reach out. I'd love to hear from you. And I hope that this framework has delivered what I hoped it would, which is to give you different data points that you can use to self-assess in your practice, that you can use to decide where you might want to focus your energy, and to give you that sense of safety and confidence that regardless of where you're starting right now, and regardless of where you want to go in the future, there are pathways. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are processes that you can follow. And if you want to do that with me, I would love to do that with you. So I'll leave it with you to reach out. And if you have any questions, again, please do circle back. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you this week. And of course, every week that you join me. And so thank you. And if you know somebody who you think would be interested, then please do share this episode. It's always wonderful for me to be able to communicate with others, to build the community of lawyers who are interested in these topics and give me the opportunity to bring you resources and to bring more of you together. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and I look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.